empowerment, girl child, and the girl child. So all these 12 areas are very critical regarding the Beijing platform. And since now we are reviewing the Beijing processes over the years, we see that these critical areas remain as critical as of today. So, why it is important is that how Beijing Plus has given a direction to not only just to the governments, different governments, but it has provided a roadmap also to the civil society organization, because identifying these areas, and now we can discuss once we proceed with the discussion here, how it has impacted the lives of the women on the ground and how it has created an impact in reducing the gender inequality over the years at all levels, and addressing the intersectionalities, which I think it is something that the civil society organization of Pakistan has always pointed out, because it has we have seen a lot happening in the context of Pakistan and in the context of Asia Pacific, how like governments are coming up with all these agendas, these policies, these frameworks, and how the implementation is taking place. But due to the structural barriers and systematic hurdles, how these agendas, which were highlighted during the Beijing Plus platform, remains a challenge for us, for the government, and for the civil society organization also. So, coming to the point where we are reviewing the 30 years of Beijing Plus processes, I think at this point, the situation is more critical. There are certain things that have come up, and one of the important thing is the cyber related technologically facilitated gender-based violence. It was a form that has emerged over the years, and it is again creating some serious issues where all the civil society and the government are critically reviewing these things, and there are some protection mechanisms also addressed. So this is basically what I can speak about regarding the first question.
Ji, thank you so much, Ms. Malala. I think काफी comprehensive response था ये. I would just want to ask you कि even though आपने एक दो चीजें, जी, Ms. Khawan Mumtaz, if you want to add anything, please go ahead.
Sorry, आप अपनी बात पूछ लें. Then I just wanted to add to the process a little bit. मैं ये बताना चाह रही थी कि ये जो Beijing conference हुई थी, fourth Beijing conference, it was the last decade of the last millennium. जिस वक्त के सारी, there was a whole review of where we stand in terms of development, rights, etc. So what Beijing So what Beijing did was important for the Beijing Conference for Women. It was important primarily, I think, it did two things. It was the intersectionality that it introduced by identifying the 12 areas of concern, and therefore, highlighting the fact that a woman's life has many dimensions and they're all interconnected. So I think that was the most important thing that Beijing ने जो इसका एहसास दिलाया कि औरत की एक यूनिडायमेंशनल नहीं है, मल्टीपल डायमेंशनल जिंदगी होती है और उसमें एक दूसरे में राब्ते की सख्त जरूरत है. दूसरी उसमें जो मेरे ख्याल से बहुत अहम बात थी कि इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में उसमें कैटलाइज किया गवर्नमेंट और सिविल सोसाइटी एंड सिटीजन्स को इस प्रोसेस में. ये इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में जब ये बीजिंग में हुई तो उसमें आधे से कुछ 40,000 सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के मेंबरान थे. तो ये उस डेकेड की जो प्रोसेस थी उसका एक हाईलाइट थी कि गवर्नमेंट और सिविल सोसाइटी को इकट्ठा करके इश्यूज को देख के और उनके रेजोल्यूशन. तो आई थिंक दैट्स द मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंट सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ द एंड देन ऑल्सो वो जो हमें फ्रेमवर्क दिया है बीजिंग ने, वो फिर हर हुकूमत ने अपने हिसाब से उसको अपने रोड मैप्स बनाए थे. यहाँ पर भी नेशनल प्लान ऑफ एक्शन जो बना था वो गवर्नमेंट और सिविल सोसाइटी इंक्लूडिंग द ग्रास रूट्स बनाया गया था 2 साल की प्रोसेस में, और उसी ने प्रायोरिटीज को डिटरमिन किया था, और वही फिर हमारे उसी के हवाले से इसी कॉन्फ्रेंस के हवाले से हमने सीडॉ को भी साइन किया था, अपने कमिटमेंट्स, अपने आप को इंटरनेशनली भी कमिट किया था। सो आई थिंक इसकी सिग्निफिकेंस बहुत है, और वो फिर हमारे लिए बेंचमार्क है कि हम उसके हर क्रिटिकल एरियाज पे कहाँ तक पहुंचे हैं, जो कि हम अब 30 साल के बाद फिर रिव्यू करें। हर 5 साल पे रिव्यू होता था। नेशनल कमीशन ने 20 साल का रिव्यू किया था, जो कि पब्लिश्ड है। इट माइट बी अ यूजफुल थिंग फॉर पीपल टू रेफर टू। और अब ये हम 30वें साल का कर रहे हैं। just to add to what Umelela has very in depth shared.
Thank you so much, Kavarappa, for these added on comments, and I think you were part of the process at that time. अच्छा, ये जो आपने बात की ना कमिटमेंट जो सारी थी फ्रेमवर्क के अंदर आई, इसमें पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हमारा जो नेशनल प्लान ऑफ एक्शन 98 में बना था, फॉलोड बाय द नेशनल पॉलिसी फॉर डेवलपमेंट ऑफ एम्पावरमेंट ऑफ वुमेन इन 2022, और फिर जेंडर पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क 2022 का भी, सॉरी 2002 एंड देन 2022 का। बेसिकली ये सारा फ्रेमवर्क बीजिंग प्लस के ही कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पाकिस्तान भी इस पे देख रहा है। ऑब्वियसली पूरा एशिया पैसिफिक इस पे काम कर रहा है, पूरा ग्लोबली इसमें देख रहे हैं, लेकिन पाकिस्तान के अंदर ये कुछ लैंडमार्क चीजें थी जो भी खबर आपा ने बात की, जिसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में खवातीन को सेंटर स्टेज पे रखा गया। और फिर जैसे मैंने भी बात की और उन्होंने मजीद एक्सप्लेन किया, इंटरसेक्शनैलिटी को शायद फर्स्ट टाइम देखा गया था कि एक औरत की जिंदगी किस तरह जुड़ी हुई है इन सारी चीजों के साथ। तो उसने बहुत एक क्रिटिकल जो थी थिंकिंग डेवलप की थी, जिसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अगर हम देखें द 30 years में where we are now, we there is a huge difference in the context of like when we talk about dialogue, when we talk about the role of the civil society organization, how it has developed कैटेगोरिकली कि सिविल सोसाइटी का क्या रोल बनता है बीजिंग प्लेटफॉर्म एक्शन को मॉनिटर करने के हवाले से, और ऑन जेंडर इक्वालिटी एंड वुमेन राइट्स एज अ कैटलिस्ट, एज अ वॉच डॉग, and as partners in pushing government institutions to fulfilling their commitments under the Beijing framework. So it has provided a whole roadmap. और उसके context में what we have seen is that इसी Beijing Plus के हवाले से Millennium Development Goals बनाए गए, उस पर बहुत काम हुआ, फिर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट गोल्स अब हम उसको देख रहे हैं। सो बेसिकली जो पूरा फ्रेमवर्क है वो बीजिंग प्लस से ही आ रहा है, उसमें कुछ चीजें ऐड ऑन होती जा रही हैं, वो रिव्यू के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आ रही हैं। गवर्नमेंट को एक रोड मैप मिलता है कि आपने जेंडर इक्वालिटी को देखने के लिए क्या करना है। सो दैट्स माय टेक ऑन।
Okay, thank you so much. These were very comprehensive answers. I'll also
Sorry,
request.
एक I just want to add another point मैं मिस कर दी, मैंने देखा अपनी
of course.
कॉपी में, जेंडर रिस्पॉन्सिव बजटिंग भी इसी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में शुरू हुई थी, जो अभी तक हम इसको देख रहे हैं, और अभी तक हमारा क्रिटिकल पॉइंट है इसमें कि किन कॉन्टेक्स्ट पे हमने जेंडर की टैगिंग करनी, बजट की टैगिंग करनी जेंडर पर्सपेक्टिव में। और फिर उसके हवाले से जाहिर ऑब्वियसली जिस तरह मैंने कहा कि जो सिस्टमैटिक बैरियर्स हमें नजर आते हैं इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के अंदर, वो एक वन ऑफ द थिंग इसके बजटरी एलोकेशन एंड यूटिलाइजेशन ऑफ द बजट फॉर द स्पेसिफिक टारगेट। सो वो भी एक क्रिटिकल इशू था जो शायद हमने अपने पढ़ाई के ज़मानों में नहीं देखा था, हमने नहीं बात इस पे की थी, लेकिन हम प्रैक्टिकल जिंदगी में देख रहे थे कि बीजिंग प्लस के हवाले से ही ये चीज़ सामने आई, और गवर्नमेंट इसमें फिर जाहिर है कि इसमें बहुत सारी और बातें भी थी।
ठीक है, thank you so much. And sorry, put your mute. Okay, sorry for the echo. Just 1 second.
I think ask people to switch off their microphone unless they're speaking.
Okay. Can everyone else please mute their mics? Thank you very much. Sorry for that disturbance. Thank you so much, Ms. Khaber and Ms. Umelela, for your comprehensive responses. हमने यही बिल्कुल नोट किया कि because of the intersectionality introduced by the Beijing Platform of Action, women के जो multiple dimensions हैं, the role of women and the importance of women's issues के वो काफ़ी intersectional हैं, cross cut करते हैं across various dimensions. जो critical areas मिस उम्मे लैला ने सारे define किए हैं और जो intersectionality की बात मिस खावर मुमताज़ ने किया, as well as the role of civil society organizations, जो उनका role है in monitoring and being very heavily involved in monitoring the implementation of the Beijing+30 goals. इसमें I think काफ़ी वाज़ह होता है what the relevance of Beijing+30 is. So I believe you've also answered my second question, Ms. Umme Laila, which I was going to ask, which was why is the Beijing+30 relevant to women and civil society in Pakistan? कि पाकिस्तान में भी ये जो अहमियत है of making our conversations and our discourse and our monitoring of issues on women issues intersectional and united and coordinated. वो सारा इसमें cover हो गया. So I will move on now to the questions for the next panelist, Seerat Khan from Digital Rights Foundation. So, Seerat, I think the first question we want to find out from you is कि पाकिस्तान ने कितना progress किया है in achieving the Beijing Platform of Action's gender equality goals? क्या कोई noteworthy achievements हैं उनके latest submission to the Beijing 30 review में? If you could just explain that, please.
Thank you, Maheen. First of all, I feel like कि बहुत ज़्यादा देर से काम चल रहा है और जैसे उम्मे लैला ने और खावर मुमताज ने कहा कि ये प्रोसेस एक नया प्रोसेस नहीं है. This has been going on for years now, and having been part of the steering committee this year around, I saw first hand कि किस तरीके से ये एक consultative process है जिसमें civil society organizations from across the region contribute. And what was interesting was the ministerial conference that happened this year around, जिसमें ministries और governments आई और उन्होंने आके present किया कि उन्होंने so far gender equality, intersectionality को achieve करने के लिए within their regions and within their countries क्या क्या किया है. My area of focus is technology facilitated gender-based violence, so I can specifically talk about some of the positions that the government took in this particular field, and particularly उन्होंने क्या क्या claim किया है कि उन्होंने किया है. So according to the report itself, जो submission पाकिस्तान government ने की थी, उन्होंने बात की कि universal service fund को expand किया गया है और internet accessibility rural areas को मिली है. Keeping into account के internet shutdowns और internet disruptions पूरी country में हो रहे हैं despite these जो उन लोगों ने कमिटमेंट्स की हैं, लेकिन उन्होंने इसको एडवर्टाइज किया गया है. उसी तरह उन्होंने कहा कि उन्होंने स्मार्टफोन फॉर ऑल प्रोग्राम इंट्रोड्यूस कराया है. दे हैव आल्सो इंट्रोड्यूस्ड वोकेशनल ट्रेनिंग अराउंड टेक्निकल एक्सपर्टीज and particularly on different skill sets, and PTA has also launched a mobile internet skills toolkit. Apart from this, we also have the virtual universities of Pakistan, which are enhanced digital literacy programs for women, जो कि according to Pakistan हम लोगों ने stride किया है TFGBB और digital literacy को increase करने के लिए amongst women. Digital financing platforms like Jazz Cash, Easy Paisa, रास्त को ज़्यादा इस्तेमाल किया गया है according to them, to empower women in for financial independence. What's interesting to see is कि किस तरीके से ये particular platforms women को empower कर रहे हैं. There's no research around this and there's no numbers around this, and particularly around the fact that how are women using these, particularly when they are living in households jahan there is violence, and when they don't have their own economic or banking accounts. There is very little to say about this, but this has been introduced as a success from their part. Another thing that I think as civil society we have been raising a lot of issues around this, and despite that this has been a success that has been quoted by the Pakistan government, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act that came out in 2016, उसके अंदर जो amendments हैं वो की गई हैं cyber bullying और non consensual sharing of images पे. And while the law itself does address cyberbullying and non-consensual sharing of images. I would also like to add that the bill itself, the implementation of the law isn't really that great. It's open to interpretation. It has been used against women multiple times on grounds of defamation when they've spoken out regarding violence that they have faced. And also because there is very little sensitization of law enforcement agencies within the country. So there is a lack of trust from women in reporting their cases. So ये जो amendment जिसको as a success बताया जा रहा है कि वो साइबर बुलिंग और इंटीमेट इमेजेस को कर्ब कर रही है, वो perhaps उस तरीके से नहीं कर पा रही बिकॉज हमारी साइबर हरासमेंट हेल्पलाइन भी है जो कि 2016 से फंक्शन कर रही है. एंड जब से ये लॉ आया और हमने देखा है कि 19,000 cases primarily of women have been reported on the helpline, which do address particularly cyberbullying, doxing, and non-consensual use of intimate images. Another success that the Beijing process pointed out, the government pointed out, was the gender crimes unit and women desk at police stations that were established, along with helplines to provide assistance to TFGBV victims. And also campaigns and trainings of law enforcement agency, judiciary, and public safety about online spaces. But the thing is that these are very easy to promise, but there's little to be done when you're directly working with these institutions. और आप देख रहे हैं कि overall day-to-day चीजों में cases फिर भी file नहीं हो रहे, and women are finding it hard to trust institutions, particularly of the government. So I mean, apart from this, उन्होंने और भी काफी ज्यादा वो चीजें amplify की हैं according to them. But one thing that needs to be pointed out is that जो progress की गई है वो बहुत slow है, and in many cases there is no transparency or accountability of how it is being done. Some of the initiatives that the government claims that they have done, they are very vague in terms of saying particularly that judicial reform or law enforcement agencies को उन्होंने TFGBV टेक्नोलॉजी फैसिलिटेटेड जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस के बारे में एजुकेट किया है, कैसे किया है, किस तरीके से किया है, किस तरीके से सेंसिटाइज किया गया है या नहीं किया गया, या उनको सिर्फ बताया गया है कि ये पर्टिकुलर फॉर्म ऑफ वायलेंस एग्जिस्ट करता है. दैट्स समथिंग टू बी क्वेश्चनड. एंड इवन लाइक आई सेड अर्लियर, जो फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन की बात हुई है खवातीन के बारे में, उसके बारे में भी देयर इज वेरी लिटिल क्लैरिटी कि वो किस तरीके से की गई है. एंड देन one other thing is that we as civil society do not believe that a success is the introduction of a law. PICA को as an introduction of a law as a success नहीं कहना चाहिए. Implementation of the law is already very weak, and then having legislations that can sometimes undermine the rights of women and children and other minorities in the country is a problem, और वो हम बार बार अपने laws में देखते आ रहे हैं. तो वो operation भी हमारा एक sustained नहीं है और एक major challenge है. दूसरा, social media access has already been restricted in the country. We're seeing that and we're living through it right now. Internet speeds are throttled, X isn't available, VPN registration हो रही है, लोगों को उनकी speech के ऊपर attack किया जा रहा है. So we're also seeing that violence has extended. First, we only talked about technology facilitated gender-based violence, but now we're seeing consequences of disinformation for women. We're looking at hate speech for women. हमारा law अभी तक hate speech में खवातीन को, gender को नहीं देखता और हर चीज को देख रहा होता है. And these are very primarily concerns क्योंकि ये global conversations हैं जिसमें बात हो रही है कि hate speech is not just limited to someone's ethnicity, someone's religion, or someone's other attributes. It's also related to gender and sex, जिसके बारे में बहुत कम पाकिस्तान में बात की जाती है. So all in all, I would say कि even though it has been claimed कि हमने progress किया है, the state in which we are looking at, particularly for women rights, particularly with how women are living in this country, it isn't that great. To be honest, and हमें नजर आ रहा है कि technology facilitated gender based violence particularly is increasing twofolds. Now we're seeing the use of artificial intelligence particularly to target women in the public affairs जिनके खिलाफ deepfakes इस्तेमाल की जा रही हैं. And I can talk about this in my next question perhaps कि अभी overall the process itself, उसमें क्या-क्या चीजें lacking हमें लग रहा है कि क्या-क्या चीजें और आ सकती हैं और address करनी चाहिए, because violence against women is also changing rapidly, so that also needs to be addressed. So I can maybe perhaps speak about that in the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Seerat. That was a very
I
thorough
would like to
response.
add a point here,
Yes,
if you may
please.
allow. First.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sirius, for your very comprehensive discussion. And I think here comes the point where we, as a civil society organization, understand what is the significance and importance of the civil society. कि इस पूरे प्रोसेस को मॉनिटरिंग में आ रहा है, तो बीजिंग प्लस की एंगेजमेंट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में जो सिविल सोसाइटी है, पर्टिकुलरली मैं पाकिस्तान की बात करूं, तो उसमें सिविल सोसाइटी भी स्ट्रेंथन हुई है। एंड ना सिर्फ उसकी स्ट्रेंथनिंग हुई है, बल्कि इंटरनेशनल सॉलिडारिटी एंड सपोर्ट के लिए जो उनकी एंगेजमेंट्स हैं वो भी ज्यादा बढ़ी हैं इन 30 सालों में। एंड व्हाट वी हैव सीन इज कि जो पूरे इंटरसेक्शनल चैलेंजेस जिसकी हम बात बार बार कर रहे हैं, वो हमें सिर्फ एक पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में नजर नहीं आ रहे हैं, हमें एक साउथ एशियन, एशिया पैसिफिक और ग्लोबल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी नजर आ रहे हैं, जिसकी वजह से सिविल सोसाइटी हैज टेकन अ वेरी इम्पोर्टेंट रोल इन मॉनिटरिंग। जहाँ पे हम ये देख रहे हैं कि रिपोर्टिंग एंड अकाउंटेबिलिटी को करने के लिए जो अभी सीरत ने बात की कि जहाँ गवर्नमेंट रिपोर्ट कर रही है और अपने इनिशिएटिव्स को वो कॉन्टेक्चुअलाइज नहीं कर पा रही, जो उनके स्टेप्स हैं वो लिए जा रहे हैं, वहाँ पे सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने बड़ा क्रिटिकली उसका एनालिसिस करी है, अल्टरनेटिव रिपोर्ट्स के हवाले से, नेशनल कमिटमेंट्स को ट्रैक करने के हवाले से, डेटा को इकट्ठा करके उसकी एनालिसिस करके उस पर लेके चलने के लिए। और फिर सबसे बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट बात है इंटरसेक्शनल डेटा जो हम सिविल सोसाइटी कर रही है, और बहुत सारी इसमें फिर डिबेट्स जनरेट हो जाती हैं, और फिर एडवोकेसी के साथ साथ कैंपेनिंग चल रही है, और फिर उसी को सपोर्ट करते हुए सिविल सोसाइटी के रोल में हम ये देख रहे हैं कि जो सिग्निफिकेंस आ रही है वो ये आ रही है कि सारे टेक अवेज जो बीजिंग प्लस के हवाले से हैं, जिसमें हम अवेयरनेस, सेंसिटाइजेशन, कैपेसिटी डेवलपमेंट की बात करते हैं, कम्युनिटी मोबिलाइजेशन के अंदर सिविल सोसाइटी ने अडॉप्ट करनी हुआ है। अब वो गवर्नमेंट उस पर रिलाई कर रही है और उस चीज़ों को लेके चल रही है। तो जो पाकिस्तान से बाहर जो आवाजें हैं वो सिविल सोसाइटी की ज्यादा स्ट्रांग हो गई हैं। सो मैं सिर्फ यही बात करना चाह रही थी इसमें। थैंक यू सो मच।
Okay, thank you. That was a really good point, given the critical analysis by alternate reports of civil society organization and their role in extensively monitoring the day-to-day reality and implementation of all these state initiatives related to Beijing+30 or just related to gender equality, women's rights, etc. I think काफी अच्छी बातें points raise हुई हैं, especially I think Seerat you mentioned कि जो government का जो submission है उसमें research और transparency, evidence backing इसमें काफी gaps हैं in the report, in the submission. And that the day-to-day reality जो context होते हैं that women and gender minorities have to deal with, that appreciation of those challenges is missing. In the interest of time, I think I will just move on to the next panelist, if that's okay, Seerat. But thank you so much for your response and for Ms. Umelela's response. Ms. Sophia Dianne, yes, you're here. Yes, again, thank you so much for joining us from the Philippines. I hope that the time zone difference isn't too bad where you are right now. So I wanted to ask you that regarding the Beijing+30 review this year, it was marked by very active participation from civil society organizations in the Asia Pacific region. So could you share any highlights regarding that, such as the civil society steering committee report or anything from the proceedings in general from the event, so that we can have that knowledge sharing, information sharing, and regional collaboration opportunities open up between Pakistan and the rest of the Asia Pacific? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maheen. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sophia Dianne Garcia from the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders and a member of the Beijing+30 Civil Society Steering Committee, as mentioned a while ago. And it's actually a pleasure to be part of this very important panel discussion and very timely as we commemorate Human Rights Day. So women's rights are human rights. And thank you to DRF for the opportunity. So answering the question, We all know that it's almost 30 years since the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action advanced global commitments to gender equality and ending all forms of discrimination and violence against women. However, even if, and this has been mentioned by my fellow panelists, we have these mechanisms, gender discrimination and violence still persist in Asia and the Pacific, and anchored in neoliberal capitalism, patriarchy, rising authoritarianism, ableism, militarism, fundamentalism, and even colonial legacies. And these have been exacerbated because of the presence of climate crisis and entrenchment of structural inequality, state violence, armed conflict, reduced space for civil society engagement. And these aren't new to us. Unfortunately, it's still existing. And confronting these challenges, advocates, human rights defenders, young activists, and feminist groups are shaping the development justice agenda to advance gender justice, social justice, economic justice, distributive justice, and ecological justice. And tying it back to the commitments of the BPFA, the main goal is to actually ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls and creating enabling environments for young people, women, and all their diversity to promote and protect their human rights and fundamental freedoms have never been more important. So it's very timely, it's very critical. This has always been part of the agenda, and yet we still face challenges. So this is where the Beijing+30 Civil Society Steering Committee comes in. You might be wondering, why was it created? So the B+30 SC was created following a call for applications by the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific and the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So there was a call to applications for civil society across Asia and the Pacific to apply to be part of the steering committee through a rigorous and application process. And I'm pretty sure our colleagues from DRF can share more of that, the long application forms. And we were chosen, and around June, we were able to convene as steering committees. And we are composed of 13 organizations from the region, and we sought to critically examine and advance gender-inclusive power dynamics, resource flows, and decision-making. The steering committee, I would like to emphasize, and it's very, very important in the work that we do, is intergenerational. We have members who have been at the Beijing+30, and we have members who are youth from the youth sector. So I would say that even within the steering committee, we have that kind of exchange of knowledge and experiences from the said process, and why it's very, very important. Second element about the Beijing steering committee is that we're very intersectional, as we have members representing youth, persons with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQI plus communities, and various rights holders as well. And we are advocating for various sets of issues, ranging from migrant workers down to the climate justice, down to women, peace, and security, and so on and so forth. So that's more of like the makeup of the steering committee. And in terms of our mandate, what do we have to do? We have to ensure the effective engagement of regional and national women's rights organizations and civil society groups in the region, in Asia and the Pacific, in the process of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, leading up to the global review and 69th session of CSW 69, which will happen next year. But at the same breath, it's also in preparation and in the lead up to the recently concluded Asia Pacific Ministerial Review of the Beijing+30. So when we were convened, and we only had like a very limited time, so DRF can attest to that. We were mandated also to submit a report to UN Women and UN ESCAP, and that report we agreed as a steering committee to focus on 4 thematic consultations. So we organized 4 regional thematic consultations between August and September, like in the span of a month, because we had to submit the report by the end of the month. And we engaged various organizations, networks, and collectives. So you might be wondering what were the consultation outcomes. So the four critical areas that impact women and gender diverse people, areas coinciding with the roundtables and the intergovernmental meetings. So it's more of like a technical aspect of it, but the four thematic areas are: first, advancing women's economic justice, rights, social protection, and decent work. And this basically highlighted what were the structural barriers to economic rights across the world of work for women in their diversities in the context of our region. Rising informality, gender-based violence, harassment at work were some of the emerging issues that came out through the consultations, and the impact, of course, of financial and humanitarian crisis, conflict and post-conflict situations in natural disasters and climate change. So that's the first one. Second is boosting women's leadership, representation, and political participation that explained the urgency of advancing these aspects among women and girls and their diversities to be able to achieve gender equality, inclusive and democratic governance, and sustainable peace and environmental justice. The third thematic area is strategies to end discrimination and sexual and gender-based violence against women, that focused on the persistent and new forms of gender-based violence in relationship to systemic power imbalances and reinforced by patriarchy, misogyny, stereotypes, and cultural norms that justify these violence. And it also highlights the extended forms of GBV, and Seerat mentioned about this, which is technology facilitated gender-based violence. So we also explored that in the said report, reviewing the challenges associated with access to justice for GBV survivors. And finally, the fourth thematic area is future forward strategies for gender equality and gender equity. And this is focusing on climate and environmental justice, as well as digitalization, addressing extreme weather events in Asia and the Pacific region, and also considering the interaction between these climate events, structural inequality, conflict, and even the precarity post-COVID-19 on women and girls in their diversities. And given that these are, well, we call it emerging issues, but it has always been there. How does this impact in terms of the goals or the vision of the Beijing+ Declaration and platform for action? So those were the four. Like, this is just a nutshell of what we have done as the steering committee in a span of a couple of months. But the outcome you might be also interested is the consultation report in itself, titled Forging Gender Just Futures through the Beijing Platform for Action. And this is actually available online. I think it's in the respective websites and also in the UNSCAP website, where you can definitely access it. And in terms of numbers, it's out input from 503 organizations representing 13 constituencies and 32 countries. And just quickly on the recommendations, the common patterns that we saw was in terms of the need to strengthen protection and recognition of human rights of women and girls and all their diversity. Second is, and this was mentioned, like financing. So there's a need to increase multi-year core, sustainable, accessible, and flexible gender transformative funding directed to towards economic rights and justice of women and their diversities, and including allocations for youth-led and girl-led organizations, networks, movements, and collectives. And third is prioritizing reversing progressive policies against, for example, LGBTQIA+ communities, youth, and establish, implement, and uphold anti-discrimination law. Because sometimes the source of discrimination and violation of human rights are in the laws itself. So there needs to be we need to challenge those and ensure that these are eliminated. And also initiate future forward strategies for gender equity, including climate change and digitalization, taking strong measures to fulfill their mandates in protecting women and girls and gender diverse people's human rights. And finally, advancing inclusive community-led intergovernmental processes during the ministerial conference on the Beijing+30 review and the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. So I will stop at that, but again, I encourage you to read the report, which is available online. Thank you so much, and over to you, Maheen.
Thank you. I'll share the link to the report now in the chat as well. I hope everyone can access it. If there are no comments from any of our panelists, okay. So I just wanted to point out that the diversity you talked about within the mix of the civil society steering committee made of organizations, that work on persons with disabilities, that work on climate justice, that work on various issues. It really brings back the point that Ms. Mumtaz and Ms. Leila Azhar were talking about regarding the active role of civil society organizations in monitoring and in involvement, in a truly holistic involvement from all areas of civil society in order to engage with the intersectionality of women's issues in how it presents itself across various critical areas. And thank you so much for summarizing the report as well, and the approach of the civil society committee in really making the report as inclusive as possible with the thematic consultations. I think that's also a really good point in talking about the role of civil society organizations and civil society in general and how they can be involved with the process. So I think I had one other question, if you could answer it maybe briefly in 2 minutes or so. What other collaborative efforts or mechanisms do you recommend between Asia Pacific states and civil society groups, if any? Do any come in mind?
Yes, so I think we already have like existing global commitments that we have. Like we have the BPFA, we have the CEDAW. In the context of women, peace, and security, we have the 1325 resolution. We have the Sustaining Peace Agenda, for example. And these mechanisms are critical in terms of ensuring the accountability from our member states, because they signed into this and they have to fulfill their mandate through like being a signatory or ratifying these agreements. At the same breath, I believe that local, national, regional, and global spaces are critical in influencing policy decisions that will impact the lives of women in all their diversity. So I would say that Beijing+30 is just one of the many mechanisms, and also CSW. But I think it's very important that this must not limit our engagement. It cannot be denied that civic space is shrinking. Hence, we must continue to advocate and demand space to engage and make leaders accountable to their commitments in advancing peace, justice, gender equality within and beyond the Asia and the Pacific region. I'd like to also reiterate, like in terms of collaboration, financing to enable effective implementation of intersectional initiatives is very, very important, because funding budget is also fuel to make sure that we're able to carry out our mission, as for example, as civil society. And finally, an area of cooperation between member states and civil society, as well as monitoring and evaluation and learning mechanisms that will influence future policies and project implementation. So if we know that it's not working already, why do we have to continue it? And we have civil society who plays a critical role in reminding, it's very diplomatic, reminding our governments to ensure that they're inclusive in the process and that they are gender responsive, gender transformative, and ensuring that it's for the benefit of their constituents. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I don't think I have any further comments. And if the other panelists don't, then I will move on to asking our final panelist questions, which I think is a good segue also to the question and answer session after this, because the questions that I would like to pose to you, Ms. Mumtaz, are related to the next steps. First of all, the first question that I want to ask is, okay, how can stakeholders work together to achieve the Beijing+30 goals across various intersectional issues at the local, national, and regional level? So could you first respond to this, and then I'll pose the next question.
Certainly. Just in continuation of what Sophia, Dianne spoke, I just wanted to say that while we are all, Asia Pacific Steering Committee, I'm sure, was the kind of successor of what used to be Asia Pacific Women's Watch. There used to be, when Beijing conference was being held in the preparatory process, is the time when Asia Pacific Women's Watch was formed. And as a subsidiary of Asia Pacific Women's Watch was a South Asia Women's Watch. So, which meant that, a lot of the commonalities in the region in South Asia were collated, and we had very active, consultations in different countries also. And then later on in the Philippines for the Asia Pacific region, with the result there was a lot of consultation, and also these global linkages that Laila was talking about were forged at that time, at the time of the Beijing conference itself, because there was the global presence of civil society in large numbers, and which linked us, and also highlighted the common issues that therefore those could be taken at the Beijing conference very strongly. But unfortunately, in our region, that camaraderie or coming together of civil society has totally stopped ever since political relations between the countries soured. We can't even go into each other's countries. Otherwise, there used to be meetings at the SAARC level in Nepal with all the organizations, and there was this forging of networks and real sisterhood, as we may say. But anyway, I think the process has been, to some extent, as Sophia tells us, has been constructive. But what I find that within Pakistan, we didn't have that kind of a process at all. Neither at the government level. The government report was, I think, either with a few experts, but I have not seen, although now I'm not in the mainstream of the Beijing process, having been part of the process from preparatory work in the early 90s to when I led the delegation to UNSCAP in 2015. So it's been a long time, but I have not seen that kind of coming together. Neither have I seen a unified NGO report from Pakistan this time, which we always used to. There used to be an NGO report with the quite intense consultation between different parts of civil society. So what we are talking about, how can stakeholders go forward? How can they? That link seems to be broken at the moment, and I think how do we get that link revived or reinstituted? At the moment, we don't see the very positive link between civil society as a whole looking at these issues together. Although we do have now the capacity of individual organizations looking at the sector that they are very busy with or they are immersed in to do alternative reports. But we don't have a collective NGO report. So I think we need to look at that and think about how do we restart that process. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was that in 30 years, the Beijing process has evolved. New issues have come in, especially climate. Although climate was a big issue even in the 90s when the Environment Conference was held, which had a special Agenda 21, which was to deal with women and environment. For the first time, the link between women and the impact of climate change on women was recognized, and women's role in natural resource management was also recognized. So now that has become a very central issue. And similarly, the regional issues may also be changing. Migration has become a big issue also over the years. So these were sort of new, and of course the technical, the online violence against women. So it's a dynamic. What I've tried to emphasize is that the Beijing process has been a dynamic one, incorporating new issues, new ways of responding, and also the focus on young women. It was always for women and girls, but somehow girls were not always focused upon with that. But now the youth is very much part of the process, which I think is a very positive thing that has happened over the years, the inclusivity. In Pakistan, I think we have to, build linkages around the issues that we prioritize in Pakistan, which are embedded in the Beijing process. I think what Pakistan has been very successful in is ratifying all core human rights conventions, starting with CEDAW, the Child Rights Convention, also all the others, the economic and civil rights. And so we've signed all those conventions to fulfill our international obligation. We've also tried to align our policies with those. But we've got the most progressive laws now. I mean, laws in areas that were never thought of earlier. We have laws, we have even policies. but our issue is really where the implementation takes place. So, which is very evident from our social indicators. We're still at the bottom of the rung in the, the development index and economic empowerment indices and everything. So the whole really issue for us and for stakeholders is how do we make sure that the implementation of these laws and rules and regulations and policies are effectively done. That is the way forward. And the Sustainable Development Goals are also aligned to the Beijing Platform of Action's goals, objectives. So we have to see that those are actually, and we also have policies. I mean, we have some very good policies. The National Gender Policy Framework, for instance, is very intersectional, identifies the leadership to be taken by which sector, which commission, which province, but nothing happens. So the point is, the question is, kya political will hai bhi ki nahi? I think it has to do with how we view women as a society and also as a government. While we fulfill what is required and we can say we've got achievements, which on paper are achievements, but we also see that in spite of laws, the conviction rate for violence against women, gender-based violence, is not more than 3 or 4%. So, and women have the same difficulty as Seerat has pointed out to go and file a case against. The attitude of the police, the level of the prosecution, all those are things that are missing. So when we're talking about these, I think in our country, we have to focus on duty bearers. The duty bearers have to be responsive, be sensitive, and it is something that all stakeholders have to be involved in. So advocacy has to continue no matter what we do, advocacy based on evidence. And therefore that research becomes very important. The research, for instance, that Seerat was also mentioning, and we all know that the nuanced research is missing. So either we have to very actively include in our stakeholders the academia for them to do the kind of research which is empirically sound and gives us the kind of things that we are looking for. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to do. Beijing Platform for Action identifies areas, has given us the space to make our own framework or our own pathway. And then what we now have to do is how do we make that pathway actualization of it and the realization, and for it all sort of stakeholders have to be there. Civil society by itself, I think, is very active in Pakistan, has now penetrated into the grassroots, works with the grassroots, but it works more for services rather than for rights. And I think it's that rights dimension that needs to be strengthened and to be brought into focus, because the power relationships at all levels are the ones that determine how much achievement and how much equality or voice a woman can have. So, so those are the kind of things that we need to do. There are also institutional measures that need to be taken. And again, I say it has to be all stakeholders, because we can't isolate them either by hierarchies or by their institutional framework. But how do we make an impact on making sure that policies and laws are implemented? There are many very important things. For instance, after the 18th Amendment, each province there's no unity in terms of legal measures. You may have, for instance, early marriage age in Sindh is 18, while in other provinces is 16, with the result that it's so easy to kidnap a woman, take her across the border and force her into marriage. So those are the kind of things we have to have. The rights laws should be uniform across the country. And so what I'm really trying to say is that we should identify what our objectives immediately are, and then mobilize stakeholders around those issues. Similarly, their commissions have been formed. Now, the role of the commissions, the National Commission as well as the Provincial Commission, is really to monitor and track government's compliance of all its commitments, constitutional as well as international. I think that role is not always understood by the government itself, because they want to see it as a department which is, an extension of one of the ministries, but it's not. It's a watchdog, and that watchdog role involves that the government recognize the watchdog role, or inko they should have a consultative status in all decision making forums, because they are the ones who bring the voice of from the human rights aspect in all actions of the government. So I think those are the things that relationship between government and stakeholders has to be, I think, revised, because at the moment the civil society has got shrinking spaces, no access to funds, and are constantly under scrutiny, and that disrupts their work also. And then the new dimensions of online harassment, and that is a new dimension. So things can happen, but it has to be, all stakeholders have to be on the same page towards the objectives of what we want, how we want our women to be free of fear, to be able to realize their aspirations, and then also fulfill the obligation that they have to the society. So those are kind of things I feel. And there are also within the system, there's too much duplication. There's too much overlaps, duplications. No one department not sure who is to take the lead. So these are systemic issues that we need to point out and that need to be addressed. So some of those things that I wanted to talk about, and I think somebody also mentioned the financial support you do, budgets. We're talking about transformative policies, but without budgeting, that's not going to happen. So while has to be fresh thinking and more inclusion in decision making, and listening to voices of not only civil society but public at large through proper forums.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khaver. I think your response covered so many key points that I don't really know how to summarize it because it was that expansive. I think there was a lot of talk about reevaluating the relationship between government and stakeholders, about how to keep the dynamic, the inclusive and intergenerational dynamic of Beijing 30 going forward, even after it concludes when it's presented at the Commission for Status of Women next year, how to bring in more research-based advocacy, how much civil society organizations need to focus more on rights-based advocacy rather than just service delivery. Also talking about more need for global linkages as they were formed Pele, but also like reviving that as well, considering कि अभी with regional frictions वो global linkages थोड़े से वो कमजोर हो गए हैं, but moreover, just I think you have covered pretty much everything that we can think about when envisioning where to go from here. Regarding Beijing+30, the role of stakeholders, the role of civil society, and what the government must also do when, with regards to its national commissions, with regards to its laws and policies, which are very progressive, but don't really see much on the ground reality difference. If they are not reevaluating how to include women and how to tackle gender-based violence on the ground level. So I thank you very much for that response. And I think we all really appreciate that. If there are no other comments from the panelists, I think we can open it up to some question and answers.
Can I add a couple of things?
Sure.
I think on practical note, I think what the government needs to do and we need to pressurize for is for it to coordinate better with different departments that address women's issues. You see, the Beijing process ने हमें ये बताया, हमें दिखाया कि intersectionality, और हमारे documents भी कहते हैं intersectionality, लेकिन implementation silos में होती है. So when we're talking about a big change in the governance system, जिसमें के coordination हो और अपनी अपनी जिम्मेदारियां पूरी तरह से हर डिपार्टमेंट ले और आपस में बातचीत करे. अभी बातचीत नहीं होती है, हर एक अपना टर्फ को प्रोटेक्ट कर रहा होता है. तो एक तो ये बहुत जरूरी है. दूसरे ये है कि अब बहुत सारी सर्विसेज बना दी हैं हुकूमत ने. for instance, in Sindh, there are 11 helplines. Now, anybody who wants to access a helpline won't remember 11 numbers. So how do you make people aware and informed that these are the helplines that you can use for what? Or a central helpline that you can raise your issue at one place, which can then be sent to the concerned agency. So we need to now use technology for facilitating support and services. So इस किस्म की चीजें हो सकती हैं. It's not too far. In fact, सिंध में तो काफी हद तक जो उनका पुलिस डिपार्टमेंट है उसमें बहुत चीजें नई हो रही हैं. So इसी तरह standardized indicators for violence against women. We gave them. So इसके लिए there has to be a consensus on some of these operational issues that can bring a change in people's lives. And finally, on the issue of youth, I will say that in Pakistan, female youth and adolescents is not catered for at all. There are no special programs for them. You don't even talk about them, especially on health. Either you are a child or you are a married woman. There's nothing in between to address health issues of young women. So there are many things that need addressing, and we need to perhaps come back together to re-identify our priorities. Thank you.
Thank you again for that. I think re-identifying our priorities, re-evaluating our structures, our systemic issues, how we operate in silos, जैसे कि आपने कहा है, हमारे काफी ज़्यादा जो operational issues हैं, उससे भी re-evaluate करके काफी मज़ीद बेहतरी हो सकती है आगे जाके. So I would like to now open the floor to the rest of our participants, audience. I think we already had a question in the chat, which I can pose to the panelists. Mohammed Ilyas asked, what are the most significant socio-cultural barriers hindering women's access to and use of digital technologies in Pakistan? There's quite a bit of conversation going on about that. Does anyone want to respond to this? Any of our panelists regarding women's access to and use of digital technologies in Pakistan, there's socio-cultural barriers?
I think Seerat is the best place, but one can take a shot at it, of course.
I mean, it's open to all the panelists. I understand Seerat's specialty. Seerat, do you want to answer?
Yes. Sorry, can you repeat your question? I think I lost you in between.
Sure, no, it's okay. So in the chat, we have a question from Mohammed Ilyas. What are the most significant socio-cultural barriers hindering women's access to and use of digital technologies in Pakistan?
Okay. So I feel like to understand how women use technology in Pakistan, we all have to look at it from a perspective that how they use public spaces in Pakistan, which is very restricted. There is always surveillance, and we call this a social surveillance going on women's devices, particularly when they make their social media accounts and their devices that they're using. So if, for instance, there is a boy, तो आप देखेंगे कि घर में उनके अकाउंट्स को और उनके डिवाइसेस को उस तरीके से नहीं देखा जाएगा जिस तरह खवातीन के डिवाइसेस को. इसीलिए उनकी स्पीच और उनका एक्सेस ऑनलाइन स्पेसेस पे बहुत रिस्ट्रिक्टेड होता है. ऑन द साइबर हरासमेंट हेल्पलाइन वी receive a significant number of cases from women, and most of those cases are pertaining to the fact that their personal information, and the personal information can just be a normal picture. Nothing else is being used against them when someone else is posting it, and even just a mere picture can have consequences for them. So access to devices is restricted because women are constantly being surveilled, and also because their body and this is like a wider topic जिसमें intersectionality और बहुत सारी चीजें आ जाती हैं, but the clauses around our laws in morality and in obscenity is always subjected to women's bodies. So bodily autonomy of women's body is also being surveilled on online platforms. When platforms like TikTok were banned, the only concern that government departments were giving out जब ये platforms ban हुए थे was the fact that women we're using it for singing and dancing, and that's not allowed. So उससे हमें एक अंदाजा होता है कि how restricted these spaces are for women. And while progress has been made, we still see that mobile devices and internet access in Pakistan is generally very restricted for women, which is why the PTA has now come up with a policy in ensuring that we have more women using online devices and the internet. But I feel like a lot of work needs to be done around this, because like in public spaces, women are discouraged to go out in public, and they're also discouraged to use online spaces personally, unless and until it's very I feel like urban centers are obviously very different, wahan ke dynamics fark hai, lekin you will always see ke women will be discouraged even if they want to use it for their careers, for their jobs. उनको ज़्यादा promote नहीं किया जाता कि they have a more prominent social media presence or they use the internet more. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Seerat. I think you're right. What it goes back to is a lot of our socio-cultural attitudes. हमारे अपने society में, हमारे mindsets में. So thank you for that response. Tyra, would you like to go next?
Yeah, it's an observation and a question as well. First of all, I would like to thank Khavara Appa and all the panelists for their very, very useful input, and almost most of the topics, most of the concerns have been addressed, but there were just 2 points. First of all, I would like to take Seerat's point a little further, that during my work, I have seen that for women, especially women who are facing gender-based violence, the urban-rural divide is something which has not been paid attention to that much. That, for example, Punjab Police has an app for women, but they don't consider those women. Actually, they face gender-based violence more than urban women. It's not a sweeping statement. I have seen that women, they have avenues, they know some avenues to contact in urban areas, but rural women, they don't have that much access to mobile phones, smartphones especially. So that if when they are making an app, they should consider those women also. So there should be a parallel or some arrangement for them as well, that they can also contact some organization like service like police. They can contact them through other sources, through other ways for the redressal. And the other point I wanted to raise here, because we have people who have ample experience with government, among the panelists, working with the government, and Laila is still working with them. So I may be wrong, but my personal feeling is that whenever I have worked personally conducting some research and have seen other researchers and conducting trainings, I have noticed that the main problem when we see that there are ample good laws and policies, but when there comes implementation and sometimes making policies, the gender disaggregated data, lack of that becomes a huge issue. Whenever we go to any department or even contact any organizations, any trade union, they don't have such data available. So I think this is a very crucial thing, and government departments or people who are at the helm of affairs, they should do something about it on an urgent basis. That's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Really good points, Ms. Tyra. Especially related to the urban-rural divide, which highlights हमारा जो gender digital equity का जो मसला है कि is that access to technology equitable, accessible, and what differences show up based on area, based on gender. Seerat.
I just want to add one other thing. I think Tahira ने बहुत अच्छा point raise किया, because there's access to technology that also differs in the urban and rural areas. You see that the FIA cybercrime wing, which is the designated wing that looks into cybercrimes and technology facilitated gender-based violence cases, they are based in urban centers in Pakistan. So for a woman in the rural setup to go and file her complaint, she needs to at least go once and go file her complaint. So we now also see that redressal mechanisms don't really center women in the rural area and their concerns. And I mean, sensitization and everything else is an issue, of course, but also priority is not rural women. Unfortunately, women living in the rural spaces, it's mostly women in urban centers who are, I mean, more aware of these laws and redressal mechanisms that they should be adopting in this time. And I just wanted to add a point that gender segregated data, I mean, that's a very valid thing that keeps on coming up, because we as civil society keep on reaching out to government departments and other people as well, but gender is not a priority, I feel. Isliye we feel like there is a lack of data in terms of gender segregated data. I mean, with even, what's interesting is even if the law says that they are bound to give it, they're not giving it. For instance, the FIA cybercrime wing needs to give out transparency reports and apni reports annually of the kind of cases that they've been receiving, but despite that we don't see that. And this is why it's very hard to see how patterns are changing. I mean, privately, civil society organizations are the only ones who are producing some form of research from an intersectional lens, which has some form of evidence. But again, I think this was raised earlier as well. So funding is an issue, accessibility is an issue, and collection of data is also an issue, because we don't have very well-defined methodologies through which we can collect data. There are no sources available through which we can do it, which is why we don't see a lot of research around these topics as well.
I'd like to add very interesting information that I was in Sindh and talking to their AIG, Additional Inspector General, who heads the gender crime unit in the police department. And she offered, I mean, and I think it made some sense. She was saying that, you know, when what happens is that if there is, for instance, there's a case of rape or abuse or anything, the same case will get 4 FIRs registered. The son will do it, the uncle, and then those FIRs are counted, so you don't really get the actual information. It's seen as four FIRs, while actually the case is 1. So she was talking about how we need to establish data where these duplications are eliminated, and they're doing it. So I think where there are models being developed which can be effective in collecting accurate data, other provinces should also follow that process. Like the Punjab Commission set up the gender management, GMIS, which gives you a whole picture of what each department is doing every year and making it easy to track. Other provinces are now wanting to adopt the same. So those kind of systems, I think that sharing and standardization would help go a long way for data and information.
I also want to add a point here on the data-related question and discussion going on. This is a challenge, yes, and I'm just second the point that Seerat made up, that we don't have the consolidated data. So since I am like in this interim phase of National Commission on the Status of Women as a chairperson, I'm serving there. So one of the critical thing that has come up, one of the first challenges that I'm facing is consolidating the data. And since now this Khawarappa mentioned about the gender parity report and the GMIS for Punjab, that Punjab government that developed the Provincial Commission. Now ICT, National Commission is coming up with the ICT gender parity report. And the decision is that the national government will take gender parity reports as a national gender parity report from 2026 onwards. So the data is there, but there is a discrepancy with all that data. So there are several indicators that are missing on the spot, that from where we don't have any data. It's not been collected by the major national surveys that are Central Bureau is doing that. Several indicators coming from the Sustainable Development Goals, coming from CDAW related things. The data is missing. So we are like trying to find a way out. So what now we are like revamping the National Gender Data Portal, which was established in 2021. उसकी basis के ऊपर, so all the provincial governments will feed into that data portal, and we are thinking, हमें लग रहा है कि वो we'll have a consolidated data, और उसमें जहाँ पर discrepancies आ रही हैं, we'll be taking it up with the Bureau of Statistics. So this is a critical issue. तो जिसकी वजह से obviously हम as a civil society भी और as a government भी हमें मसले आते हैं, हम वहाँ पे policy making में we don't have data. So this is something where I would request all the civil society organizations to come forward and support the commission. Not only this, but to consolidate the data in a way that it is accessible to everyone, for the policymakers, for the parliamentarians, and for the civil society organizations. And with regard to those indicators, जहाँ पे हमारे पास डेटा ही नहीं है, अब नई चीजें डेवलप हो रही हैं, सो उन इंडिकेटर्स को हम लार्जर कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बात कर रहे हैं ब्यूरो के साथ कि इसमें वो नेशनल लेवल का हमारे पास डेटा लाए. अब हम चीजों को देख रहे हैं कि हमारे पास एग्रीकल्चर के हवाले से हमारा सर्वे नहीं हुआ, हमारा जो PSLM है वो 3 साल से नहीं हुआ, मिक्स का सर्वे जो रेगुलर होता है वो भी नहीं हो रहा, लेबर फोर्स सर्वे 2 साल में हो रहा है लेकिन वो 3-3 साल लगते हैं, चाइल्ड सर्वे जो है वो इतने अरसे में नहीं होता. तो ये डेटा के हवाले से पूरा प्रोसेस ही नहीं होगा तो हमारे पास डेटा कैसे आएगा. अभी भी हम जो डेटा रिपोर्ट कर रहे होते हैं इसमें बहुत जगह पर सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का डेटा गवर्नमेंट कर रही होती है, मैंने भी ये देखा अपनी अभी थोड़े अरसे में. तो हम कौन सा कोलैबोरेशन का मैकेनिज्म कर सकते हैं जहाँ पे सिविल सोसाइटी का जो डेटा है उसको ऑथेंटिकेट किया जाए. सो ये भी डिस्कशन एक हमारे सामने आ रही है, और मैं समझती हूँ कि दिस इज द पॉइंट वेयर वी नीड टू अडॉप्ट the national and local monitoring mechanisms and systems, और जहाँ पर systems हैं उनको improve किया जाए और जहाँ पर नहीं है उनको वहाँ पे शुरू किया जाए. फॉर एग्जाम्पल लोकल गवर्नमेंट के हवाले से मेन इशू जो हमें नजर आ रहा है वो यही है, जितनी भी इम्प्लीमेंटेशन लॉस की है वहाँ पे लोकल गवर्नमेंट के ना होने की वजह से वी आर अनएबल टू गेट the impact at the grassroots level, जो अभी जहाँ पे बात हो रही थी urban and rural divide. Secondly, जो data mechanism local government से आना चाहिए provincial governments के पास after 18th amendment, और फिर वो national government तक आना चाहिए, वो भी link missing है. So इस तरह की चीजें जो है मैं I think we need to address all these barriers and all these systematic challenges which serves at the end कि हम उसका impact नहीं दिखा सकते बहुत सारा काम होने के बावजूद.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we can look into how to make this a priority in our research advocacy going forward. हम जितना ज़्यादा बात कर रहे हैं about civil society organization involvement post Beijing 30 in terms of like holding the government accountable, supporting grassroots level change, and also just influencing and influencing हमारे जो cultural perceptions and socio-cultural mindsets that limit our efforts in bringing about gender equality, gender equity. I think this main problem of data, that our data is limited, that there's duplication of data, कि हमारे data collection mechanisms are not uniform, that there is limited transparency, there's hardly any transparency reports or transparency related to research methodologies, कि काफ़ी ज़्यादा data discrepancies भी आ रही हैं. I think this is something that maybe हमारे जो जैसे regional collaborations, international collaborations होते हैं, हमारे global linkages जो बनी हुई हैं through Beijing 30, maybe we can also look into how to incorporate regional or international models that can streamline all these issues as well, and work towards making data accessible and that way also affecting intersectional issues, जिसमें agriculture rights, labor related rights, child rights, ये सारे फिर obviously impact होते हैं due to that lack of data or that lack of reliable data.
Just comment on that,
Yes.
Mahin, briefly. You
Yes.
see, when we are using data, it's always official data is considered the most authentic, because otherwise, for smaller researches, those are really give you insights. But and then there has to be a combination of quantitative and qualitative. The other thing, and therefore, when we look at sometimes at civil society data, it hasn't been rigorous in terms of methodology. So therefore, it has to be institutions. Therefore, I was talking about academia, the research institutions within the academic institutions who have a mastery over methodologies and know how to mix methods also. So it has to be rigorous. And civil society data gives you insights and is quite useful for your interventions at a small scale or to identify problems. But that data does not give you comparability. So I think we have to see that certain data has to be produced by the government, but it has to be more incisive and more nuanced also. And also the academia then gives you a different level of kind of information and data. And the GMIS that we were talking about was a government department's performance that you were looking through that GMIS. And that can be, and now KP has also already developed it. You have to find out where to locate it. Balochistan is going towards it because the Prime Minister wants gender parity reports from every province where they have no system of collecting information from their departments at the moment. So they're doing a very surface kind of report now, but I think by another year or two, they'll all have that system. So tracking government performance will become easier. And for civil society advocacy, that would be very useful.
Thank you, well noted. And thank you for sharing those points with us as well. I think we have gone over 4 p.m., which was the stipulated time for the panel discussion, and chunke everybody else has other commitments as well. I would like to now officially conclude in KP University of Peshawar is doing GMIS. Thank you, Umelela, for contributing that to the chat. I would like to officially conclude our event now. Thank you so much to the panelists, first of all, for joining us, for cooperating with us, for coordinating, and for your insights in the discussion. We really appreciated it. हम सबको बहुत खुशी हुई इस event में and ये बात करते हुए. And I would like to hopefully invite the panelists for us to continue the conversation going forward in future opportunities with digital rights foundations or on any other forum, be it regional, be it at the local level or national level. So we can keep this conversation going on gender equality vis-a-vis the Beijing+30 framework. Okay, then I think that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. For everyone else, the recording will be uploaded on Facebook. Our deepest and sincerest apologies for the technical issues, but we will upload it ASAP on the Facebook page. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khudafis.
Thank you. Dafis.